Hey, this is Chandra Selvadurai. I'm the Managing Director of Pharmaco Australia and New Zealand. If you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Dennis Giannoutos.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutos.
Hey, welcome to the show, Leadership is Changing. What we as leaders know to be true is that change is constant. Leaders everywhere confront similar obstacles because people are people, but everywhere you go, leaders are overwhelmed, disrupted, and under pressure. They run from email to email, meeting to meeting. Many leaders are not changing quick enough, which means they run the risk of becoming irrelevant and being left behind. The purpose of the show is taking our listeners' leadership to another level by finding their balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. I believe we don't have enough effective leaders in the world today, and if we can get the leaders to step up and lead change, then they can inspire real change. Hey listeners, it's now time to adapt in our fast-moving world. I want to welcome you to today's episode. I have a wonderful guest with me, Chandra Selvadurai. He leads the Trans-Tasman operations of Pharmaco New Zealand Limited, a company specialising in sales, marketing and warehousing, and distribution of pharmaceuticals, medical devices, and healthcare products and services. Chandra has worked in the healthcare industry for over 30 years and was appointed the CEO of Pharmaco in 2013 and became the Managing Director in 2017. A big welcome to you to the show, Chandra.
Thank you very much, Dennis. I appreciate the opportunity to have a chat with you.
Awesome. Whereabouts are you in the world today?
I am sitting in my home office in Auckland in New Zealand.
Very cool. Now, your name, first name, surname, where does your name originate from?
So Chandra Selvadurai, it originates from Sri Lanka. So my forefathers were born and raised in Sri Lanka of Tamil origin. So that's where the name comes from. I mean, there's also connotations that Selvadurai has got sort of some Portuguese sort of an influence, and I haven't been able to validate that as to whether that's true or not. So there's a little bit of mystery there, perhaps.
Oh, I think it's a beautiful name, Selvadurai. I think it's beautiful and Sri Lankan, wonderful. So are you a big cricket fan?
I'm a big cricket fan. I'm a big football fan. I'm a big rugby fan. Anything that's got a bat and a ball and anything that you can get up and scream at and shout at and get passionate about, that's me.
That's awesome. Very good. Hey, we've given the listeners a little bit of a background about you. Tell us, is there anything else you'd like to share about you and your background?
Yeah, listen, very, very, very quickly, Dennis, thank you for asking. I was born in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, and I lived in Malaysia till I was about 15. And then through my support of my parents, I left to go to the UK to start my studies in the UK, A-levels, etc., which I did. I started doing that, but I ended up from being in the UK because the costs in the UK for study was really, really high. And my brother and my sister had studied in the UK as well. And I felt that there was a huge burden on my poor folks because they were bankrolling the whole operation. And anyway, I managed to get an opportunity to finish my pre-university in Australia. So, and also closer to Malaysia. And I went to Australia to do my tertiary admissions exam and finished that, and then ended up going to university in Perth in Western Australia and did my postgraduate and some other sort of study in Australia, and started to work in Australia. And one of my friends was transferred to New Zealand through work, and he said to me, he says, "Mate, you should come over. They've got something called snow in this place, So I thought about it. I thought, I'll come over to New Zealand for a little holiday. And I came across to Wellington for about a week. But I noticed in the newspaper when I bought a paper when I landed that there were a lot of jobs for medical laboratory scientists. And I'm a trained medical laboratory scientist. And so I called and applied, handwritten a few notes to a few labs. I got 6 labs come back to me and say, come in for an interview. I went for 5. I got 5 offers, and I thought, gee, this New Zealand is, it's a pretty cool place. They all like me here. So I decided to put a hold on my master's studies in Australia, and said I'll come back. Came to New Zealand, and that was back in 1988. And New Zealand has been home ever since then. So, and I left home, as I said, very, very young, but from a very close family. So that was quite, I think, difficult for my parents to see, their young 15-year-old son disappear, knowing that I probably would not return, because that was, I guess, the sort of person I was becoming, that I would have wanderlust for travel and whatnot. So New Zealand is very, very happily has been my home for over 35 years. So
wow. And did you spend a lot of time in Wellington as well, or did you move to Auckland?
I spent 2 years in Wellington, so they're my formative years in New Zealand. Coming from Perth, Western Australia, to Wellington was a bit of a shock to the system, I can tell you. But I loved being in Wellington. It was great. I made lots of really good friends who are still friends to this day. And I have spent, the last 33 years in Auckland. I got married, and my wife is an Aucklander. And I've had 2 kids. Well, they're not kids anymore. They're adults. My son has got a similar wanderlust as me and is in London, and my daughter, she lives here in Auckland. So yeah, there you go.
Fascinating. That's very good. Yeah, I'm actually from Wellington, so we probably actually bumped into each other probably in the streets, maybe. But
possibly, very possibly. New Zealand's a small place.
That's what I was going to say. A very small place. Now, look, you've been in the healthcare industry for 30 years, or over 30 years. And you were appointed as a CEO to Pharmaco in 2013. So how did you actually get into leadership?
I think, Dennis, I always felt that taking initiative was a really good thing to do. And it's something which I guess my parents also sort of, inculcated into me. And also ensured you always do the right thing. And where you could, just do and be better and be the best that you could be. And I think, other thing was showing respect, empathy for people, and being able to actually draw people to you and to develop a feeling of trust. It was very important. So, it's sort of a more of a self-discovery thing. But all of this helped me in a range of roles. And then when I joined Pharmaco about 28 years ago, the leadership back at Pharmaco then perhaps recognized that there was something there that, I wanted to do. And I ended up, being in a position where there were people who would come to me, and then it became people who started to report to me. And then it just developed from there. And, you did a few courses in sort of management and whatnot. And I remember early on, many years ago, I was with a multinational company, and I was sent to Singapore for a management course. And I met a number of people there and learned a lot from other people. I think that's also, part of leadership is it's never about you. I think it's about people, and it's how you learn and interact and develop your own sense of identity from other people. So I met these folks from all around the world, and I recognized, that there were ways and means that you could get the best from other people just by being yourself and being open and honest and truthful. And people actually trusted you, and they confided in you, and you were the more richer for it as well. So listen, I don't think there was a clear steps that I took. I always felt that I wanted to be in a position where I was able to make a difference and to be able to change things for the better. I mean, it sounds quite dramatic, but, I don't think it is. I think it is just a case of just being the best that I could be. So that's kind of how I stumbled into leadership, I think. And I remember many years ago, I was in a meeting, and I was meeting with the chairman of a company, and I was asked to sit outside, the boardroom having a cup of tea. And outside the boardroom, there was this little plaque. It was this tiny little thing, but it's really colorful, really drew me to it. And the words still, I use this every chance I get, to be honest, every person I meet. All of my staff know this, back to front, or my colleagues rather. And it said this, it said, good, better, best. Never let it rest until your good is better and your better is best. And I thought, oh my goodness, that was just fantastic. And what was incredible, it was written by a saint, Saint Jerome, from the 14th century.
Wow.
So, crikey, I would have employed him the first chance I got. But that was, for me, that's also, I think, an element of what good leadership is. Just be the best you can be. Yep. You don't have to be better than anyone else. Just be the best you can be.
Yep.
And hopefully that's going to be enough.
I think it's great. I love what you're sharing there. That's brilliant. And even just that, what was on that plaque, wow, that would have been pretty cool.
Yeah. Even
just to be able to go out for a coffee with that person or even spend time with that person, right? Imagine that. And it'd be fantastic. And the other thing too is it's really quite interesting how what you're saying here is be yourself, be open and be truthful. And that's what people are looking for. They're looking for that leader who's open, realistic, transparent, and that's really important. So I think that's some really good traits that you've actually had there, that you've used and you continue to use, which is brilliant to see. Now, you know how I just said about having coffee with the other person just before. So my next question to you is, Chandra, who would be your favorite person? Now, this a leader. Now, this person could be alive or from history. Who would be that favorite person and why?
Right. Well, I'm not going to answer your question, the way you would hope. I don't. There isn't, for me, that isn't one specific leader. Again, you draw from so many different people, and sometimes it's people you're drawn to them, and they're not leaders per se, but they're just people who've got great ideas and people who sort of emit this presence about them, and I'm very fortunate that there are very many people that I know who are my friends, who I respect highly, and you sort of draw from them. But I guess, there are people like Nelson Mandela. I certainly respect him for what he stood for, and the fact that what he stood for was quite unpopular with the ruling government at the time, but he stood his ground and he had the strength of his convictions. And for me, that is really quite an important part of leadership. And even closer to home, our former New Zealand Prime Minister, Sir John Key, who I've had the pleasure and privilege of meeting on a number of occasions. He's just a really, for me, a very nice chap, very down to earth, but incredibly clever, a great orator. He spoke so well. He was extremely clued up, if you must, in the subjects that he was speaking about, and you would think that would be the case, for as the prime minister of the country. But he had a presence which I really admired. So he is another chap. I mean, Barack Obama, I always consider him as a surprising leader, and having read his book, a couple of his books, The Audacity of Hope being one of them. I say he's surprising because he. The first black president in the United States. Who would have ever thought? And how he came through that was through a process which he followed and which he, sort of circumnavigated, and then ended up, becoming the nominee and then becoming the president. So again, that's a story of someone, having a strong sense of what they wanted to do and where they wanted to end up. So you've got to be respectful of that. And listen, there are also many different leaders of industry and people who are just everyday, punters really, who run companies, who run their own organizations, who are honest, they're focused, they're innovative, and they've got empathy. And there's an element of truth about what they say and how they do it, sort of thing. So I think there's a mix of people. I mean, what I believe is my favorite leader today will be different tomorrow, because there'll be someone else who will impact on me, and I'll think, wow, that's pretty cool what they've done, what they've said, and I'll take notes, and might use it again in the future. Yeah. So,
and I think that's a key that you've just mentioned there, taking notes. And I think leaders need to take notes when people are speaking, because, as you said, there'll be something that they might say that you can take away and use. Interesting to hear what you said about the three different people as well, and about their strength of convictions, their presence there, how they've turned up, how they're approachable, but also having the sense of what they wanting to do and achieve, and staying focused on getting that done.
Correct.
And I think that's brilliant. So it's a beautiful summation of those three people that you share with us. Thank you. So that's really cool. And I know there's lots of leaders out there, and everyone has different things for us as well, which is good. Now, the show here is called Leadership is Changing. Now, when we mention that title or that statement, what does that mean to you?
it's actually very true. Leadership is changing. And for me, one of the key elements of change in leadership is the emphasis that enhancing the culture of an organization is critical. So culture is key in my humble opinion. It is all about people. I think when you show interest and support your people, they in turn will show interest and support your business and you and leaders. So for me, it means that it requires more inclusion, more input from a wide and different group of people within your organization and sometimes even outside of it. And I think leaders now need to be more courageous and embrace the fact that things are changing. Because the thing is that you can control only what needs to be controlled, not what can be controlled. But, obviously, there's certain things you need to control, i.e. good, solid processes, etc. But you can only control what needs to be controlled. You can't control other things. And if you try to, you might become a cropper. So, don't be, I think as leaders, you can't be controlling. You should not be controlling. And you need to be open to changes. And sometimes changes happen often. They don't just happen once a year or once every 6 months. Sometimes they're changing so quickly, so often. And I think we've recognized this, over the last 2 years or 18 months with the global pandemic. And I think one of the things that how leadership has changed, and also you need to always provide people with a sense of belonging and safety where you can. Keep people safe. Make them feel that they mean something. And it might sound a little bit altruistic, but it's not. I think it's really important. That culture has to be absolutely 100% critical.
When you're talking about the culture there, the fact that people feel like they're being heard, maybe what you may be saying, but also feeling safe, that psychological safety. It's not just about you physically being safe, but psychologically we can be safe, or having a safe environment where I can be me, but also you're going to help encourage me and enable me and equip me to probably move on to do other things. Is that what you're talking about more?
Absolutely. That's right. You're enabling people. You're not disenabling them. You're actually enabling. You're giving them power, and you're supporting them to use that power, and from there things will change, and you'll need to be able to. So leaders need to be fairly nimble, and just because I think this way right now, more than likely would mean that I need to actually change tomorrow because things change, and situations change. So I think you just need to be, and I know there's the words like pivots and all that sort of stuff, which is true to a certain extent. But I think you need to also change yourself as well. Your values will never change, your beliefs will never change, but your operating principles may. Just be ready for that. I think we just need to be a little bit more courageous, I guess, to be able to handle that.
Nice. Your values and your beliefs don't change, but your operating.
Yeah, I think the principles how you operate may change, and that's stuff that, that again, control only what needs to be controlled.
I think that's fantastic. You're so right, because our values and our beliefs are probably in cement, if I can put it that way, concrete. Some of them may change or evolve over time, but then those operating principles around it, that can actually change and move. And we should be able to be nimble, as you're saying. Nimble leadership, that's a great title just there. I think nimble leadership is really important for all of us. The thing I think a lot of people do, or leaders get caught out, and I love your views on this, is that they are just doing things day in, day out, or they get stuck in the weeds and they don't lift their heads up to look out what's going around them. And then they're not being nimble. They're not adjusting quick enough. And sometimes, as I said in my introduction, if they're not changing quick enough, they run the risk of becoming irrelevant, being left behind. Well, what's your thoughts on that?
100%. Listen, I think that's absolutely right, Dennis. And I just think you need to be in a situation where you can't afford, and this is where you need to be aware of your surroundings. You can't afford to fall into the weeds or into quicksand. You need to know what's going on. And in order for that to happen, you need to have really good people around you as well, because they are going to be your guides as well. They're going to say, hey, there's quicksand there, Chandra. Don't step into that, and I wouldn't go there if I were you, How about you think about this? So my role is to help people think as well and support them in their thinking and their processing. I need good people to be able to help me do that as well. So you need to surround yourself. I think this is where the leadership is changing as well. I think you need to. I think I'm surrounded by people who are much smarter than I am, and also much better than I am. So which is fantastic, because it allows me to do what I need to do, and and I draw from them. So have good people around you. I think that's important.
Yep. And I think that's a smart move for a leader to have the right people around them, really good people who are talented. I think that's very smart. You know how we're living in a world today that's very fast-paced, ever-changing world. What's your thoughts here, Chandra, about what makes a leader successful in today's fast-paced, ever-changing world?
Right. No, thank you for that question as well, Dennis. Listen, I want to sort of draw you to one of my favorite books about leadership, and it's called Chiefing Your Tribe, and it was written by an anthropologist. His name is Michael Henderson. It's about how to become a leader worth following. And this book was given to me by a very good friend of mine and a leader in his own right, a chap named Simon O'Shaughnessy, who I believe you also know. And it's sort of like it's a very easy book to read, but it's also very, very insightful, and there's a lot of good meaty goodness in it. And I think a successful leader today needs to be honest. They've got to be confident. They've got to obviously be capable. They need to be courageous as well. They have to be very clear in their communication. Also, needs to be very fair and also be reliable. People need to be able to rely on good leaders and walk the walk and talk the talk. And also be inspired about what you do and about the people around you. You've got to be inspired. You don't have to be inspiring, but you've got to be inspired. I think that really, in my opinion, is kind of what a leader needs to be successful in this fast-changing world. You need to be able to roll with it, but if you have those basic tenets and they're strong, then, it puts you in a good position to be able to handle all the madness that goes around you, and you're able to handle things appropriately.
Yeah, I think it's great. There's a TV program on Netflix. I don't know if you've ever watched it. It's called SWAT, and it's about a SWAT team in Los Angeles, the police department. And as they're in the truck and they're on their way, they talk about staying fluid.
Correct.
Be fluid, right? And as you said, they've got the fundamentals, they've got the basics, they've got everything else which is very strong, and they can fall back on that, but they need to stay fluid depending on the situation being followed on. And you're just given a great example of actually that, whereby leaders need to be like that today. We need to be moving and being fluid, team, and our leaders need to do that all the time.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, listen, I love that show. I've watched every episode. It's pretty cool. Yeah, I agree with you. That being fluid part is that you're going to get stuff thrown at you that you thought you knew all about stuff 18 months ago when we got presented with this pandemic. Boy, oh boy, was that, and we continue to be as well, as we know.
Yeah, amazing. So now you and I have been talking about through the lenses of a leader. If we were to change the lenses now and start talking about the lenses of employees, how has employees' expectations of leaders changed?
Yeah, thank you again for that question. I mean, I think that the proud and powerful Maori tribes in New Zealand have a fantastic word for leader, and this is rangatira, which means weaver of people. And the construct of rangatira is more about centership than about leadership, centered in their people and centered in the culture. So that's why the people and the culture are a critical thing. And the role of the weaver is to inspire and to align people. So I think from an employee's perspective, that is what I think employees would have, or what their expectation would be about a leader is being able to be, we need to be able to weave, sit in this, not leading the charge like, the Light Brigade. And that there is a place for that kind of leadership, of course, but from my perspective, the concept of rangatira really, makes a heck of a lot of sense to me. And it's I think it's a personal sort of thing as well. And it's quite a different concept to that traditional leader, which in the certain times that leader is also required. But I think, as expectations, employees want their leaders, I think, to be more centered, to be able to weave a strong fabric, to be able to show strength and, to be able to tie them into that as well, so that they feel the same sort of degree of strength and support and in a strange sort of way, freedom as well. And you're not actually constrained by standing behind, and when you draw your sword and say, wait, and then now charge, that it's a constant. And we talked about being fluid. I think being a weaver is actually being having that degree of fluidity as well. So sorry if I'm sounding quite dramatic, but that's kind of how I try and answer that question. That's how it made sense to me.
I think it's beautiful. I love the way that different cultures around the world, whether you're talking about Māori or you're talking about Greek or Sri Lankan, whatever, there's different cultures have some wonderful teachings for us around how we can learn from them. I think the big thing for all of us is what we do with it.
Yeah.
And I love that the weaving of a strong fabric and then tying them into it and bringing them into that whole fold. I think it's beautiful. I think center leadership is probably you're spot on what employees are looking for today.
Yeah. And I guess, what happens there is if people feel that they are part of that fabric, part of that weaving, then the good people, they believe in that more and more, and it becomes part of a legacy that they're trying to build as well. And we talk, for me, leadership legacy is really, really important. But that legacy is not my legacy that someone else has shared. It's a vision that becomes part of their legacy, and then it becomes inextricably linked.
Yeah.
And I think that really, for me, is a degree of success with people is, that they do what they do because they want to do it, because they see value in that themselves. And of course, relationships that they've got with their peers and what have you is also important, so everyone shares in that. So I think that centering, weaving sort of leadership is I think it's pretty cool. And there's a lot of credence to that, I feel.
You mentioned it just before, and I thought, oh, what a great question I could probably ask you. And it's something I haven't even thought about till just now, which is around, you mentioned a leadership legacy. What would be your leadership legacy? Is that what you just shared with us about the weaving side of things, or what would be yours?
Yeah, listen, I think my leadership legacy is actually, leaving behind an organization and people within the organization that will continue to build and grow in their own energy. And for me, having been part of it, or perhaps initiating it, is something which I'll take great pride in. Again, it's not about me. It's something that has been developed, and it's become, it grows with everyone. But, somewhere down the line, and I think, with my kids and my kids' kids, they say, hey, your dad or your granddad or whatever, was part of this, and this guy actually, may have sort of lit the fire for what we've got today. That's kind of, for me, would be an amazing legacy to have.
Excellent. Yeah. Now, we've been talking a little bit about legacy, and then I think it's also, I love what you said there, too, about with taking it with their own energy and doing something with their own energy, which is great. Now, if we get you to get your crystal ball out here and start thinking about the future, where do you see leadership being in 5 years?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. It's a difficult one to answer as well, Dennis. But I think in the last 2 years, if we go back a little bit, last 2 years we've been embroiled in this pandemic, and we are likely to still be coping with the effects for the next few years to come. So I think it goes into that next 5 years sort of scenario. I think there needs to be more weavers developed out there, and I think that leadership in the next few years does need to be inspired, and we need to have more people who are people who would be considered to be worth following. And I think leaders would need to work to get that right with their people. And then from there, new leaders will develop, and then so I think it's about, leadership is about development over the next 5 years. Because what I think it's taught me in the last 18 months to 2 years with the pandemic, you cannot do this on your own. The best ideas you thought you had, well, that goes down the chute. You need to be able to recreate, redefine, redevelop, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the next 5 years, we're going to see that in a different sense, in a different sort of form. So we need to be ready for it. And just because you think you've done this now, just because you think you may have won the battle, there'll be plenty more battles to fight. So we need to be ready for it. And leaders will need to equip themselves, with the tools to be able to handle things. 5 years is a really long horizon in the scheme of things at the moment. So, we don't know what we don't know. And we certainly didn't know about the pandemic, and it's now turned up. And it's, trying to throw a few more curveballs at us as we move forward. So I think, I think that's kind of what needs to happen over the next 5 years. We just need to be ready to actually do things differently.
Awesome. There you go, listeners. We need more weavers. We need more people to be inspired, who are worth following, people who can develop themselves and others to start setting up the legacy going forward. Thank you, Chandra, for joining us on today's show. If our listeners are wanting to get hold of you, where should they go, Chandra?
Listen, just sort of jump onto my LinkedIn page, Chandra Selvadurai, and I don't think there are too many Chandra Selvadurais out there. And I'll be very happy to connect with folks who feel value in connecting with me.
Awesome. Hey, it's been a real pleasure talking to you today. So once again, thank you so much.
Pleasure's all mine, Dennis. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Hey, listeners, what we as leaders know to be true is that change is constant. Change is incredibly scary, especially with the unknown and unfamiliar territory. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing. Look out for the episodes as they're being released, download them, have a listen, put a review and a rating. Feel free to share them with your friends, your family, your network. If there's any feedback you'd like to give me about the show, or if you have a question for the Ask Dennis Freestyle episode, send me an email, dennis@leadingchangepartners.com. Listeners, it's always a pleasure being with you. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutsas. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.